Hi, and welcome back to this Friday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Bryan Fischer is my name. Great to have you in the conversation. Honored and pleased to welcome to our decision maker line Steve Lonegan. Steve Lonegan is running for the open Senate seat in New Jersey that was vacated due to the death of Senator Frank Lautenberg. Steve, welcome to Focal Point with Bryan Fischer.
Bryan, I'm thrilled to be with you. Thank you so much.
Well, and I appreciate having you on, and I was delighted to see that there was a conservative putting his hat in the ring for this race. You are running in the Republican primary. The primary, I believe, is coming up on August 13, and then the general election will be in October. And I understand right now you and your team are scrambling to get the signatures, a very short window here, but you have to have a certain number of signatures turned in by Monday. Is that correct?
That's right, Bryan. We have to file 1,000 signatures by Monday to qualify for the primary. We have cleared the Republican field. There were no other candidates, establishment candidates of any type. They dropped out when they... Bryan, to give you the background, I would be considered the conservative leader in New Jersey. I ran in the primary against Governor Christie 4 years ago. I garnered almost sub 45% of the primary vote as the conservative candidate. And I'd like to say that I'm the guy that's responsible for making Governor Christie become a conservative. But that's fine. What the governor has set up here today with the death of Frank Lautenberg is a special primary election in August with a general election in October. And I'm probably the only person in the state that has a network of activists who are able to put together the 1,000 required signatures in only 4 days to qualify for the primary.
Now,
so the moderate Republicans who were going to run have all backed off. They've all bowed out. I now have the support of the conservative movement, the Tea Party movement, and the Republican establishment, which is a remarkable development in New Jersey. So I'll be going into this primary unopposed.
And that would be good news in terms of fundraising and campaigning, because you can build a war chest then for the general election in October and won't have a primary battle to fight, which is not going to be true on the Democratic side of the ledger, at least as far as we understand. Is that correct?
Oh, there's going to be a brutal battle on the Democrat side between Cory Booker, the Twitter-happy mayor of Newark, Frank Pallone, who happened to be the co-prime sponsor in Congress of Obamacare, and a couple of other lesser Democrats. So they're going to be spending a lot of money. But it really doesn't matter, Bryan, who they elect on the Democrat side, because all of them are pro-abortion, pro-gun control, pro-gay marriage, pro-illegal immigration. They're all supporters of Obamacare, cap-and-trade, Dodd-Frank. And they're all going to have to be apologists for Benghazi, the IRS scandal, and the DOJ scandal. So it doesn't matter to me who they elect. Whoever they elect, in our election in New Jersey on October 16th, we will beat the liberal Democrat machine. And, Bryan, the whole country by October 16th will be watching this race, because this is the first U.S. Senate race since Obama was reelected, and it's the only race in the whole country.
Well, it is going to be fascinating to watch, Steve, because... your name has suddenly popped into national profile here, where it hadn't had that level since the campaign against Governor Christie. A lot of people are familiar with Cory Booker. They know who he is, at least by name. Frank Pallone, less or so. But you got a situation here where they're going to spend time beating each other up. And your point is that no matter who survives that, we know what their worldview and political ideology is going to be. And, I'm talking here with Steve Lonegan, who's running for the open Senate seat in New Jersey as a conservative. And, Steve, our listening audience primarily consists of social conservatives, economic conservatives, national defense conservatives. And you perhaps have already answered this question sort of obliquely by referring to what your opponents stand for in some of these areas. But tell us why let's begin with social conservatism. Tell us why a social conservative, someone who believes in the sanctity of life, somebody who believes in the sanctity of marriage, somebody who believes in the nuclear family. Tell us why a social conservative would want to vote for Steve Lonegan.
Bryan, I'm a 100% pro-lifer. I have been all of my life. I went to my first March for Life in 1976. I'm 100% pro-life without exception. And my position before I endorse any candidate is I endorse no candidate, I don't care who they are, unless they're pro-life, because I believe unless you can make that fundamental decision on the sanctity of human life, there's no other decision I can trust you on. And I am unequivocal on that. I always have been, and I've never wavered from that in my entire 16 years. I was a mayor, reelected 3 times in a Democrat town as a pro-life candidate. My wife is a Catholic school teacher, and my wife and both my daughters are pro-life as well. So that is something that's extremely important to me, and that's the message I will take to the U.S. Senate.
Now, let me ask you about the marriage issue, because this has happened a lot where we've had candidates that have said they are for natural marriage, man-woman marriage, and then the pressure gets on, the push comes, and they fold. Tell us where you are on the marriage issue and what you'll do in D.C.
I grew up with my grandmother, who was an Italian immigrant, had the infant of Prague and a crucifix in her bedroom and a burning candle all the time. And, you know, I learned to go to church every Sunday, probably more often. And I hold the sacraments as much more important than the government policy. So I'm a 100% supporter of traditional marriage.
Now, let's look at economic issues. Why would an economic conservative want to vote for Steve Lonegan?
Bryan, I'm a known fiscal conservative. Through my career as a mayor, I was the only mayor in the entire state of New Jersey that had a budget less. 12 years after I was elected, my budget was less than the day I was elected 12 years before. There's no other mayor in the entire state of New Jersey that can say that. I believe in a flat tax, the abolishment of the IRS, cutting the size of government, not a little tiny bit, but a lot. And I am a known fiscal conservative. For the last 7 years, I've been the state director of Americans for Prosperity in New Jersey, probably the most, successive and aggressive grassroots free market organization in the country. And I built Americans for Prosperity's most successful chapter. It was a very important job to me. I enjoyed very much my policy work on economic issues, but I resigned my job yesterday to give 100% to the U.S. Senate. Bryan, I intend to win this election because if I don't, on October 17th, I have no intention of being an unemployed loser. I've never been in my life, and I'm not going to be this.
Now, another issue that's a great concern to our listening audience, I know, and to social conservatives in New Jersey would be your stance on national defense, and in particular on the threat that comes from fundamentalist Islam. Tell us how you're positioned on those issues.
I think we have to invest the largest portion of our military spending should be on national defense of our borders and our own security. And it does concern me that we dilute much of our money by sending our troops to faraway places and 400 bases around the world. I'd like to see a lot more focus on defending our own borders, tighter security, and addressing that exact threat that you're talking about. I think it's the biggest threat of our lifetime. I was born in 1956, so back in the 60s, we had air raid drills, and it was the Soviet Union that was the big threat that we lived in constant fear of. Well, there is no more Soviet Union, but they've been replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood, by this, people who don't nothing but to destroy us. And they think that dying for the sake of killing us is honorable. So this is a huge issue. We don't take it seriously enough, and that's something I'm going to be leading on in the U.S. Senate.
Now, Steve, let me cycle back to the marriage issue just for a second. I want to drill down just a little bit on the issue of the homosexual agenda, because that's a very, very important issue for us, care about the moral fabric of this country. We don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do with DOMA. We don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do with Proposition 8. But, for example, there is an effort on the part of those that are behind the homosexual agenda to resurface the Employment Non-Discrimination Act that would give special workplace protections based on sexual preference. It would remove the constitutional right of employers to gather around them a staff that would represent and embody the values of that particular business and that particular enterprise. So those of us that are conservatives see this ENDA, as innocent as it sounds, as a grave threat to the First Amendment, religious liberty, freedom of association. What will you do if ENDA comes before you for a vote?
I will vote no. Not only vote no, I'll be in vocal opposition. I ran a business for 25 years. I was in the manufacturing business. I was a successful businessman. And as I've become more and more involved in learning more about government policies, we're constantly finding these nice-sounding bills that are wrapped up in feel-good ideas for the general public that are then rife with all kinds of underlying issues that, in essence, undermine our individual liberty and our First Amendment rights, or all of our rights. I'm well aware of that. I have enough experience now between being a mayor for 12 years and running a policy think tank for 7 to understand what legislation means and what its real threats are, and how the liberal left uses these kind of bills to advance their left-wing agenda. And there is an unbelievable left-wing assault on America, Brian. These are some of the most primordial attacks on our fundamental principles in the last 5 years that I've ever seen. So we're at a real turning point in American history. Does the Constitution still matter? Are we going to stand up for individual liberties, for the sanctity of life, for the sanctity of the American family? Or are we going to allow Barack Obama and his left-wing extremists undermine this nation? And it's not going to happen. It's just remarkable to me that on October 16th, the whole country is going to watch New Jersey vote on these issues. And what they're going to learn is the so-called hopelessly liberal state of New Jersey is not as liberal as you think.
One last question.
Win in October.
One last question, Steve, before I let you go. And it has been 4 decades since a Republican has filled a Senate seat in New Jersey. So this would be a shift of monumental proportions. And I got to think, Steve, with what's going on in D.C. right now with Obamagate, that may provide a kind of an opening for people maybe who have had left-leaning ideologies to think about alternatives, because you got a lot of liberals, you got a lot of mainstream media types very, very unhappy with what this administration is doing when it comes to civil liberties, and just might be willing to take a look at an alternative. Last question. I saw an interview you did when you kind of announced your run for the Senate, and you had, I thought, a kind of creative response to the criticism of Governor Christie that the special elections are going to cost around $24 million. You had an idea about how you could shave half the cost of that off.
Right, because in New Jersey has what's called project labor union agreements. Everything has to be union. We could cut the price of that election by going to non-union labor and letting the private sector compete in delivering those machines. There's a lot we can do, Brian, but I think that New Jersey voters are a lot more conservative. They haven't had a conservative Republican candidate to vote for in 30 years. That's why the Republicans keep running these moderates. But, you know, Brian, I would be remiss if not announcing that my website is LoneganForSenate.com, Lonegan for Senate.com. We still are in the development stages. Well, our site is up and running. Our Facebook page, Steve Lonegan for U.S. Senate, is up there. I'd urge people to go there, join this effort. By October 16th, the whole nation is going to be taking part in this election.
Our guest has been Steve Lonegan, conservative candidate for the vacant U.S. Senate seat in the state of New Jersey. Steve, I can't tell you much. I appreciate you taking time to chat with us. Sounds like if you make it to the Senate, Ted Cruz is going to have a soul brother. May God's best be with you. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. God bless you, Brian. Thank you.
Focal Point, AFR Talk, back in 2.